Hello, everyone. We are starting our webinar in the series of webinars that our initiative Hill Migrant Hub presents to the public, to the community of providers and to the community of women forced migrants and to social work students. Today we present Hill Stories Employment in the United States. It's part one of this webinar dedicated to employment challenges related to forced migration. Today we'll have Deborah Contreras, who is a woman activist and co-facilitator of this talk, Elvira Brodskaya, our woman activist and co-facilitator, another woman activist from our project, also a co-facilitator, Clara Sarantopoulos, our MSW student from Fordham University. And let's start, Chloe.
So our goal for today will be to listen to the personal narratives from women activists on the topic of employment in the United States. We will learn a bit about the gaps in existing policies aimed to address the challenges to obtaining employment, as well as the experiences that may happen in the workplace, including discrimination and exploitation. And lastly, we want to have this webinar in a series to spread awareness of the injustice faced by forced migrant women and move towards our goal of building community to help others navigate. And we want to begin with some reflection questions that you can take some time to think about now throughout the presentation, and we'll return to them at the end of the webinar. So what do you think the employment experience looks like for women with lived experiences of forced migration? What are some of the existing policies or solutions aimed to address the challenges to obtaining employment for this population? And lastly, how does being an asylum seeker impact the employment process? So we will just leave this up here for a little bit. Take a moment to read these over, reflect on them, and again, we will return at the end of the presentation. Okay. So now we will move on to we will listen to our first narrative from woman activist Deborah's story.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Chloe. So as an immigrant, forced immigrant, we usually start from the scratch. And I have been in New York for almost 4 years now. And at the beginning, I started a job in a restaurant, which was completely different from what I studied in my home country, Venezuela. So over there at the beginning, I did not have time for lunch, and I was working 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. So the law says that you should have a right window time for a 20 minutes lunch break. And the manager did not give me that break. So also another incident was that one day he put me to work on a Friday evening until midnight, 12 a.m. And next morning I was supposed to open the restaurant. So I needed to be there at 8 a.m. Obviously, this is illegal since the worker needs to rest between work hours. And by that time, I did not do anything regarding suiting or anything with law because I was just arrived to New York, and I was in process for my asylum application. But with time, I addressed this problem to the owner of the restaurant, and after that, everybody working over there, including me, was able to have a lunch break and a flexible schedule too. So with this, my rights, her rights, we we know the workforce from refugees or asylum seekers are facing many problems. Also, we are vulnerable to labor exploitation, and some employers take advantage of this situation. So, for example, they don't pay overtime hours, or they failing to let workers know their legal rights. And also we can see racial discrimination or sexual harassment.
Yes, thank you for sharing your story, Deborah. So regardless of one's status, those working in the United States must be treated with dignity, paid for their work, and not have to fear retaliation. You can download the Workers' Bill of Rights, which is available in 15 languages on the New York City government website to learn more about your rights in the workplace, and remember to have your employers respect these rights, though sometimes we know that it is very difficult to bring up these issues with your employer. So now we will move on to our next personal narrative, story by Elvira Brodetskaya. I believe that you are on mute.
Hi everyone, my name is Elvira and I would like to share my story of getting EID, Employment Authorization Card, which is crucially important for every asylum seeker. I came to New York in 2016, and a year ago, I got my Employment Authorization Card. It was 2017. And the rules of getting the employment authorization for asylum seekers are made so that those who come seeking for a job do not succeed. It was the main goal decades ago, and it remains like that now. And I, in theory, understand why is it so, but in practice, it turned out very bad for people like me. When we first applied for EID, we had to wait for like 6 months from the moment of asylum application was accepted, just to apply for working authorization. And just to tell you, we do not apply for asylum application in the moment we enter the United States. As usual, it happens like in 6 or 12 months after arrival. So you can imagine the timeline. Still, it was good enough, because after that, we didn't wait much. It was less than 6 months, maybe 4, when we finally get our card. However, we had to ask our congressman for help to fasten up the process. And when people think like they came here to take our jobs and not to pay taxes, they just do not realize how hard it is for a asylum seeker in reality to get that card. Firstly, it's not a right to get it, even though you will get it, I'm almost sure. It is stated clearly by USCIS that it's not a right, it's a possibility. So they can refuse in theory. Even after they get your money and your application, and now it's more than $500 per person, and make you wait for a month, they can refuse. It's their legal right. Secondly, all your life becomes a waiting in stress. And as the working authorization is never guaranteed, you can be sure. You wait for the authorization, then you have to be aware that your time comes, then you should reapply for a renewal. And again and again. And as usual, you apply for a renewal 6 months before it expires. Well, but recently they gave us a right to apply whenever we want, even earlier, because the time of waiting right now is not 6 months and even not 4 months. And it's a great change because previously when we came here, the waiting time was like officially from 30 to 90 days. And you could even ask to fasten it up after 75 days. Now there are no official time frames at all and no obligations from USCIS side. You can wait for 6 months after application and you can wait for a year. I know people who are now waiting from previous March and they still didn't get anything. Recently, we waited for 8 months for renewal and we ended up asking the congressman for help again. Every work authorization also is just for 2 years. And it's actually just waiting and waiting. Working authorization is crucially important. Without it, you can't find a new job. Formally, you can still work on your private job for 6 months after your card expires. However, no one accepts this when you are seeking for a new job. And there are many beautiful words about non-discrimination, etc., but as a fact, you are just not invited to the next round of interview. And that's all. Without work authorization, you just don't have any documents that provide you a status here because asylum seeker is not a status. It's a possibility to live in the US legally waiting for your interview. And your waiting can last for years. So for me, as for a person with from a long line, it slowly become a nightmare. If you lose your card, you pay the money again and wait for months again. There is no free exchange of cards, even if you just lose it. And from the 2022, you can fly without your working authorization card because asylum seekers do not have a right to get the real ID. And the best thing here is that USCIS knows about it very well and literally doesn't give a damn. So let me repeat, the work permit and employment authorization document, EID, only is valid for 2 years, remain the only tangible benefit asylum seeker can get while waiting for their asylum cases to be reviewed. And although it's a human right to access and obtain employment, getting rights fulfilled or recognized remains a challenge. And right now, there is over 1.5 million applications of EID renewals at USCIS, and 400,000 affirmative asylum cases are backlogged, with thousands of people waiting for their initial interviews for 4 or 6 years. Actually, it can be 10 years, it can be 11 years. 4 or 6 years is a very good option.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. And actually, you can read more about this on our latest blog post on Her Migrant Hub website by Tanzilia Oren, who's present in this webinar, project coordinator and woman activist, which explains more about the existing policies, but as well as we have explained the gaps within these proposed solutions to address these problems. So as Elvira mentioned, there's many cases backlogged and thousands of people are waiting for their interviews even longer than what is stated. So thank you for sharing. And now we will move on to our final narrative from woman activist, who will describe more about how immigration status is used to further discriminate against women with lived experiences of forced migration and describe the experiences of sexual harassment and exploitation that can occur in the workplace.
Hi, everyone. I introduce myself as an anonymous person because I feel so worried about the situation in my workplace. So I work in a restaurant as a server over a year ago. for over a year ago. And my last experience in this topic is a bit for myself. And I had an experience in my workplace of unwelcome behavior. And I start to adapt myself to this job. And in the same time, I am realizing that there are some things that wasn't okay, that are red flags. So they used to make comments about my nationality and my age, exposing my requesting, for example, action in my schedule because I'm Christian, as my religion. My boss denied to give me that day off. I asked him, and he is constantly saying me, no, I need you over that days. This situation is making me feel uncomfortable, and I don't really know how to deal with it from a legal aspect, because for me, it's like a thought. I don't want to suit my boss, but in the same time, I would love to speak out and put a line from respect to me. So my boss took me apart and told with me about he can give me another day during the week. And in this way, I will be able to have Sunday off. We are 7 servers in the restaurant. I know for sure one of them could be able to cover me on that stage. Also, when I asked for a request of day off in the last year, he was like, oh, you know, in this country, you come to work, you can to have a lot of days off. And he was asking me constantly what I am doing during my days off. So he was torturing me, saying me like, I don't want to fire people, but I will do it if I need to do that. And if I make a mistake, I could tell the difference between me and my other co-worker. So that verbal violence, and he remember that like a major failure, like highlight, oh, you did this wrong and you did that another thing wrong. And I don't see this action through my coworkers. I would love to have an option to do something, but also I'm afraid because I don't want to be without a job, and I don't want to be quiet because it's my only job. Sorry, quiet. And I don't want to be fired. That situation is in this workplace, but also a few years ago, I was working in a restaurant where I was victim of sexual harassment. My ex-boss, in that time, he invited me to have drinks with him, and I denied. And from that day, he was being aggressive with me. So thanks God I could quit that workplace, but it's extremely tough how employers abuse about employees because their legal status. So forced migrants, refugees, or asylum seekers flee their place of birth in hope of escaping torture, human rights abuses, and other trauma. However, immigration status is used to further discriminate against women with lived experience of forced migration. They remain vulnerable to sexual harassment, exploitation, and inadequate protections. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for sharing that powerful story. And so as we can see, some of the workplace protections and rights are not applied for those who have the status of asylum seeker or are forced migrant women. So workplace protections, including anti-harassment and anti-discrimination protections, as well as wage and hour laws, must apply to everyone. However, as we can see, and as we know, employers and officials who commit such acts do not face consequences. So thank you all for sharing your stories and being here today with us. We are ending the presentation by moving on to the reflection questions, what we discussed in the beginning, as well as some additional ones to reflect on the webinar and narratives that were included. So how did these narratives provide insight to the employment challenges faced by women with lived experiences of forced migration? And more importantly, how do we address these issues? So we will have some time for anyone who wants to share their thoughts on this, but we will also continue to discuss action steps and explore solutions in the following parts of this series on employment. And we are open to hearing your thoughts and reflections on these questions. We have our website, Her Migrant Hub, where you have access to more resources, blog posts, stories, and a lot more insight on such issues, including employment and many other topics. So if there isn't anything else, if there's any other comments from facilitators in the group or comments from those present in the webinar who are joining us, please feel free to share. If not, we will see you for the following parts in this series.